The mind changes when you start observing it. Buddhist wisdom. There is something running inside you right now. It has been running since before you can remember, and it will keep running through everything you do today. It shapes what feels important. It decides what threatens you. It colors how every moment of your life arrives. And most of us have never really looked at it. Over the course of a life, we learn to manage many things: career, relationships, money, health. But there is one piece we rarely examine, and that piece happens to be shaping everything else: the mind. Here is a question worth sitting with. Do you actually know what is running inside you right now? I do not mean what you have read about it, or what someone in therapy once told you about it. I mean knowing it directly, the way you know where your hand is when your eyes are closed. For most of us, if we are honest, the answer is no. We have lived with this thing for decades. We have obeyed its fears, chased its desires, defended its opinions, and mistaken its movements for who we are. But we have never really met it. More than 2,500 years ago, in northern India, the Buddha pointed to something both simple and difficult. If the mind is shaping experience, then the mind has to be observed directly, not believed in, not analyzed from a distance. Observed. In one of the earliest collections of his teachings, the Dhammapada, the opening lines place the mind at the beginning of everything. Mind precedes all mental states. Mind is their chief. They are all mind-wrought. If a person speaks or acts from an impure mind, suffering follows. If a person speaks or acts from a purified mind, happiness follows like a shadow that never leaves. This is the central claim. The quality of the mind deeply shapes the quality of the life that grows out of it. But the Buddha did not ask people to accept this as doctrine. He pointed to a practice that can be tested in your own experience. Watch the mind carefully enough, for long enough, and you begin to see how it creates suffering, how it repeats itself, and how it changes when it is clearly seen. But this kind of watching is not passive. It is one of the most demanding things a person can attempt. It requires attention, patience, and the willingness to return to the looking again and again, especially when the mind does not want to be seen. The change happens on its own. The watching does not. The mind has no off switch. This is something you can verify for yourself in less than a minute, and I would like to invite you to do it now if you can. Wherever you are, stop for 30 seconds. You do not have to meditate. You do not have to clear your head. Just notice how much movement is happening inside you. Count the thoughts if you can. Count the half-thoughts. Count the small images and memories and judgments that pass through. Most people who do this honestly are surprised by what they find. Dozens of mental movements in half a minute. Sometimes more than they can clearly count. This is where the Buddha's teaching differs from how mindfulness is usually presented today. The mind is not only busy when there is something to be busy about, it is busy when nothing is wrong. It is busy when there is no decision to make. It is busy on the most peaceful day of your life. When there is no problem to solve, the mind invents one. When there is no plan to make, it makes one anyway. It remembers. It compares. It anticipates. It judges. It runs through old conversations and rehearses future ones. There is a constant movement underneath everything you do, and most of us have lived with it for so long that we no longer recognize it as movement. We have come to mistake it for ourselves. Most of what you have ever experienced has not been the world itself. It has been the world filtered through this restless mental activity. Every moment of your life has arrived through this filter, colored before you ever knew it was being colored. We do not see things as they are. We see things as the mind happens to be doing in the moment we encounter them. This is the first thing observation reveals. The mind is not a clear window through which life passes untouched. It is an active force in the construction of experience. Before any deeper practice is possible, this has to be seen plainly. The mind is moving almost all the time, and that movement is already shaping the life we think we are simply experiencing. The Buddha looked into the workings of the mind with more patience than almost anyone in history. He sat with his own mind, day after day, year after year, and watched what it was actually doing. And what he found, at the root of the untrained mind's suffering, were 3 repeated movements. 3 patterns that return again and again, for as long as they remain unseen. In the original Pali teachings, these are called the 3 unwholesome roots: greed, hate, and delusion. The names sound stronger than what most of us feel from moment to moment. So let me describe them in the more familiar shape they take inside us. The first is pulling toward. The mind wants what it does not have. This is more subtle than it sounds, because we usually only think of wanting in terms of large desires: a new job, a better relationship, more money. But wanting operates at a level so fine that we miss it most of the time. The wish for this moment to last a little longer. The wish for what is happening to be slightly different from how it is happening. Again and again, the mind leans towards something it would prefer to have more of, even if that something is just the next breath of pleasant air. The second is pushing away. The mind resists what it does not want. Like wanting, this resistance is usually too subtle to register. A vague discomfort with no obvious source. A restlessness you assume is just part of who you are. All of this is pushing. The mind has identified something it does not want present, and it is working to keep that thing at a distance, even when the thing is just a feeling inside you. The third is drifting. When the mind is neither pulling towards something nor pushing against something, it goes vague. You are still driving. You are still walking. You are still nodding along, but you are not really there. Most of us spend large portions of our lives in this mode without realizing it, because the absence of focused experience leaves little memory behind. Now here is what makes this so difficult to escape. These 3 modes feed each other. They form a closed system that runs without your permission. You want something. That is pulling. Maybe you get it. The pleasure fades and the mind starts wanting the next thing. Maybe you do not get it. Disappointment arises, which is pushing. You push against the disappointment because you do not want to feel it, which tires you out, and you slip into drifting. The drifting itself feels uncomfortable, and so a new wanting starts up to give the mind somewhere to go. The cycle has no clear exit, because every mode contains the seed of the next one. Here is what is rarely said, with the weight it deserves. Much of what we call stress, anxiety, burnout, and unhappiness is intensified by the way the mind keeps running these 3 modes. Circumstances matter. Painful events matter. But even when the outer problem changes, the underlying restlessness often remains, looking for something new to attach to. The engine runs partly on the world and partly on itself. This is the closed machinery of the unobserved mind. Pulling, pushing, and drifting do not need your conscious permission to continue. They continue because they have never been clearly seen. As long as they remain unnoticed, they feel like reality itself. The mind cannot free itself by producing more of the same movement. It has to be known in a different way. What is observation? Before describing what it is, I want to clear away some assumptions that defeat many people before they even begin. People often imagine that watching the mind means controlling it, pushing thoughts down, or deciding which mental events are acceptable. None of those describe what the Buddha had in mind. When he used the word we now translate as observation, he meant something closer to noticing. The Pali term is sati. It is most often translated as mindfulness, meaning the act of holding what is present in clear awareness, without stepping in to change it. In the discourse called the Satipatthana Sutta, the Foundations of Mindfulness, the Buddha gave the practitioner this exact instruction. They understand mind with greed as mind with greed, and mind without greed as mind without greed. They understand mind with hate as mind with hate, and mind without hate as mind without hate. They understand mind with delusion as mind with delusion, and mind without delusion as mind without delusion. They know constricted mind as constricted mind, and scattered mind as scattered mind. The instruction is that direct. When anger arises, the practice is simply this. You know that anger is here. That is all. No commentary, no correction, no story about what the anger means. Just the bare fact that anger is present. This sounds almost too simple to be worth taking seriously. So let me explain why it actually works. The first reason has to do with the architecture of the mind. In any given moment of awareness, observation and anger cannot both be in charge. When real observation arrives, the anger is no longer steering. It may still be loud, but it has lost its grip on the wheel, even if only for an instant. This does not mean the anger vanishes the moment you notice it. It means you have stopped feeding it in the same way. The anger may continue for a while on the fuel it already has, the way a fire keeps burning after you stop adding wood. But the limit becomes visible. A fire without new fuel has an end. The second reason is that observation creates distance. Under ordinary conditions, you do not have anger. You are anger. You are completely identified with whatever the strongest mental movement happens to be in that moment. The instant you observe, something shifts. The anger becomes something you can see, instead of something you are buried inside. Modern neuroscience has found a partial echo of this insight. Studies suggest that simply naming an emotion can reduce the intensity of the emotional response. But the Buddha's point did not depend on brain measurement. It was something to be verified directly in experience. When a mental state is clearly known, our relationship to it changes. There is a third dimension that matters most over time. Sustained observation, returned to day after day, gives rise to a kind of seeing. The Pali tradition calls paññā, usually translated as wisdom. This is not knowledge gathered from books. It is the slow recognition of patterns in your own mind, seen so many times that you finally understand them from the inside. Why anger arises when it does. How a certain thought is always followed by a certain mood. What conditions a certain reaction every time. Each return to the practice deepens this seeing. And once wisdom takes root, it carries the practice forward, making each new observation sharper, each release of an old pattern more lasting. Observation is what begins the work. Wisdom is what completes it. One thing to clear up, because it confuses many beginners. There is no separate observer inside you doing the watching. The mind is not divided into a watcher and a watched. What actually happens is that the mind develops the capacity to know its own movements. A wave noticing other waves in the ocean. No outside observer required. I have to be honest, too many modern teachings make this part sound easier than it is. None of this comes naturally. The kind of attention I am pointing to is foreign to the untrained mind. It requires patience and returning to the practice day after day, often for years before it begins to feel like something close to natural. The mechanism is simple to describe. The practice is anything but simple to live. Most people who attempt this give up within the first few months. They expected calm after a week, transformation after a month. When the early enthusiasm wore off and the mind kept being the same mind it had always been, they assumed the practice did not work. The practice does work, but it works slowly, over months and years, not on the schedule our impatience expects. The purpose of observation is not to produce a special state. It is to bring the hidden movement of the mind into clear awareness. When that happens, even briefly, the old machinery is no longer completely unconscious. That is where the work begins. The mind does not change by becoming silent. This is one of the first misunderstandings people bring to practice. They imagine that progress means fewer thoughts, fewer emotions, fewer disturbances. Sometimes that happens, but that is not the deepest change. The deeper change is that the movements of the mind lose their authority. A thought still appears, but it is no longer immediately believed. A desire still arises, but it no longer feels like a command. Fear still visits, but it does not automatically become the architect of your decisions. The mind continues to move, but its movements no longer define the whole of your experience. This change is quiet. It rarely announces itself. You do not wake up one morning transformed. Instead, something that used to carry absolute weight begins to feel less final. An old worry appears, but it does not take over the entire day. A familiar irritation rises, but it does not need to become speech. A desire forms, but you can feel its pressure without immediately obeying it. A painful memory returns, but it no longer has the same power to pull you into its world. This is where observation becomes more than a momentary practice. It begins to reshape the habits that have been running your life from underneath. Most of the mind's power comes from repetition. The same fears return. The same cravings return. The same judgments return. The same inner stories return. Each time they are believed without being seen, they become stronger. Each time they are clearly observed, their authority weakens. This is not dramatic work. It is quiet work. A pattern that used to seize you completely now holds you for a shorter time. A thought that used to feel unquestionable now appears with a little more space around it. A mood that used to color everything now becomes something passing through, not the whole atmosphere of your life. Over time, the mind becomes less easily captured. It is still capable of wanting, still capable of fear, still capable of anger, comparison, regret, and anticipation. Practice does not erase these movements. It changes your relationship to them. They arise, but they do not always have to lead. They speak, but they do not always have to be followed. This is why the change can be difficult to notice while it is happening. It is not always the arrival of peace. Sometimes it is simply the absence of an old compulsion. You do not send the message you would have sent. You do not continue the argument the mind wanted to continue. You do not feed the worry for another hour. You do not turn one unpleasant feeling into an entire story about your life. These are small freedoms, but they are real freedoms, and they accumulate. Month after month, year after year, observation removes the blindness from repetition. The mind still moves, but it is no longer moving entirely in the dark. The old machinery may continue for a while, but it is no longer invisible. And what is no longer invisible is no longer absolute. You do not need to reach some final state for this to matter. Every moment of clear seeing weakens the old momentum. Every moment of observation interrupts the habit of being carried away by whatever the mind produces. The practice is not a war against thought. It is the slow ending of unconscious obedience to thought. That is why the mind changes when you observe it. Not because you force it into silence, because what is clearly seen can no longer govern you in quite the same way.